I start with my favorite muse, Emily Dickinson, who said that wonder is not knowledge, neither is it ignorance. It's something which is suspended between what we believe we can be and a tradition we may have forgotten. And I think when I listen to these incredible people here, I've been so inspired, so many incredible ideas, so many visions, and yet when I look at the environment outside, you see how resistant architecture is to change. You see how resistant it is to those very ideas. We can think them out, we can create incredible things, and yet at the end, it's so hard to change the world. We applaud the well-mannered box, but to create a space that never existed is what interests me. To create something that has never been. A space that we've never entered except in our minds, in our spirits. And I think that's really what architecture is based on. Architecture is not based on concrete and steel and the elements of the soil. It's based on wonder. And that wonder is really what has created the greatest cities, the greatest spaces that we have had. And I think that's indeed what architecture is. It is a story. By the way, it's a story that is told through its hard materials, but it is a story of an effort, a struggle against improbabilities. If you think of the great buildings of the cathedrals, of the temples, of the pyramids, of pagodas, of cities in India and beyond, you think of how incredible it is that this was realized not by some abstract idea, but by people. So anything that has been made can be unmade. Anything that has been made can be made better. There it is, the things that I really believe are of important in architecture. These are the dimensions that I like to work with. It's something very personal. It's not perhaps the dimensions appreciated by art critics or architecture critics or city planners, but I think these are the necessary oxygen for us to live in buildings, to live in cities, to connect ourselves in a social space. And I therefore believe that optimism is what drives architecture forward. It's the only profession where you have to believe in the future. You can be a general, a politician, an economist who is depressed, a musician in a minor key, a painter in dark colors, but architecture is that complete ecstasy that the future can be better, and it is that belief that I think drives society. And today we have a kind of evangelical pessimism all around us, and yet it is in times like this that I think architecture can thrive with big ideas, ideas that are not small. Think of the great cities. Think of the Empire State Building, the Rockefeller Center. They were built in times that were not really the best of times in a certain way, and yet that energy and power of architecture has driven an entire social and political space that these buildings occupy. So again, I'm a believer in the expressive. I have never been a fan of the neutral. I don't like neutrality in life, in anything. I think expression. And it's like espresso coffee, you take the essence of the coffee. That's what expression is. It's been missing in much of the architecture because we think architecture is the realm of the neutered, the realm of the kind of a stage that has no opinion, that has no value. And yet, I believe that it is the expression of the city, expression of our own space that gives meaning to architecture. And of course, expressive spaces are not mute. Expressive spaces are not spaces that simply confirm what we already know. Expressive spaces may disturb us, and I think that's also part of life. Life is not just an anesthetic to make us smile, but to reach out across the abyss of history to places we have never been and would have perhaps been had we not been so lucky. So again, radical versus conservative. Radical, what does it mean? It's something which is rooted. It's something which is rooted deep in a tradition, and I think that's what architecture is. It's radical. It's not just a conservation in formaldehyde of dead forms. It is actually a living connection to the cosmic events that we are part of, and a story that is certainly ongoing. It's not something that has a good ending or a bad ending. It's actually a story in which our acts themselves are pushing the story in a particular way. So again, I'm a believer in the radical architecture. The Soviet architecture of that building is the conservation. It's like the old Las Vegas used to be. It's about conserving emotions, conserving the traditions that have obstructed the mind in moving forward. And of course, what is radical is to confront them. And I think architecture is a confrontation with our own senses. Therefore, I believe it should not be cool. There's a lot of appreciation for the kind of cool architecture. I've always been an opponent of it. I think emotion is needed. Life without emotion would really not be life. Even the mind is emotional. There is no reason which does not take a position in the ethical sphere, in the philosophical mystery of what we are. So I think emotion is a dimension that is important to introduce into city space, into city life. And of course, we are all about the struggle of emotions. And I think that is what makes the world a wondrous place. And of course, the confrontation of the cool, the unemotional with emotion is a conversation that I think cities themselves have fostered. I think that is the progress of cities. It's not only the forms of cities, but the fact that they incarnate emotions, not just of those who build them, but of those who will live there as well. Inexplicable versus understood. Too often we want to understand everything, but architecture is not the language of words. It's a language, but it is not a language that can be reduced to a series of programmatic notes that we can verbally write. Too many buildings that you see outside that are so banal tell you a story, but the story is very short, which says, we have no story to tell you. So the important thing, actually, is to introduce the actual architectural dimensions, which might be totally inexplicable in words, because they operate in proportions, in materials, in light. They connect themselves into various sources, into a kind of complex vector matrix that isn't really frontal, but is really embedded in the lives and in the history of a city and of a people. So again, the notion that a building should just be explicit, I think, is a false notion which has reduced architecture to banality. Hand versus the computer. Of course, what would we be without computers? Our whole practice depends on computing. But the computer should not just be the glove of the hand. The hand should really be the driver of the computing power, because I believe that the hand, in all its primitive, in all its physiological obscurity, has a source. Though the source is unknown, though we don't have to be mystical about it, we realize that the hand has been given us by forces that are beyond our own autonomy. And I think, when I draw drawings which may imitate the computer, but are not computer drawings which can come from sources that are completely not known, not knowable, not seen, yet the hand, and that's what I really, to all of you who are working, how can we make the computer respond to our hand rather than the hand responding to the computer? I think that's part of what the complexity of architecture is, because certainly we have gotten used to the propaganda that the simple is the good, but I don't believe it. Listening to all of you, the complexity of thought, the complexity of layers of meaning is overwhelming. And I think we shouldn't shy away in architecture. Brain surgery, atomic theory, genetics, economics are complex fields. There is no reason that architecture should shy away and present us an illusory world of the simple. It is complex. Space is complex. Space is something that folds out of itself into completely new worlds, and as wondrous as it is, it cannot be reduced to a kind of simplification that we have often come to admire. And yet, our lives are complex, our emotions are complex, our intellectual desires are complex. So I do believe that architecture, as I see it, needs to mirror that complexity in every single space that we have, in every intimacy that we possess. Of course, that means that architecture is so political. The political is not an enemy of architecture. The politeia means it's the city, it's all of us together. And I've always believed that the act of architecture, even a private house, when somebody else will see it, is a political act, because it will be visible to others. And we live in a world which is connecting us more and more. So again, the evasion of that sphere, which has been so endemic to the pure architecture, the autonomous architecture that is just an abstract object, has never appealed to me. And I do believe that this interaction with the history, with a history that is often very difficult, to grapple with it, to create a position that is beyond our normal expectations, and to create a critique. Because architecture is also the asking of questions. It's not only the giving of the answer, it's also, just like life, the asking of questions. Therefore, it is important that it be real. We can simulate almost anything, but the one thing that cannot be ever simulated is the human heart, the human soul. And architecture is so closely intertwined with it, because we are born somewhere and we die somewhere. So the reality of architecture is visceral. It's not intellectual. It's not something that comes to us from books and theories. It's the real that we touch: the door, the window, the threshold, the bed,